Honestly, it's hard to keep track of everything that happened this WNBA offseason, but after the dust has settled a little bit, two teams look loaded more than everybody else, that being the New York Liberty, the defending champs, and the Indiana Fever. The Liberty make the trade for Natasha Cloud. I mean, that adds to what was already essentially a super team with Jonquel Jones, Brianna Stewart, Sabrina Ionescu, Lainey Hamilton, Leonie Fibich. Now you have Cloud, gives them a lot of length and defense and the ability to play Sabrina Ionescu off ball. And then there's the Indiana Fever, who have 5 of the top 30 scorers from last season as their likely starting lineup. Caitlin Clark was already the most prolific offensive guard in the league by far. She's next to Kelsey Mitchell, the biggest scoring backcourt in the league. And they add toughness, size, shooting, experience, particularly with Natasha Howard, DeWanna Bonner, and Sophie Cunningham. Now, you can't discount what some other teams have done. I mean, I love the move that the Sparks made. They put themselves on the map by getting Kelsey Plum. The Mercury rebuilt on the fly after Diana Taurasi retired. And of course, Brittany Griner went to the Dream. The Aces added Jewel Lloyd, but that was kind of a one-for-one swap with Plum. And they still have to prove they have replenished their depleted depth, but you can't rule them out. Or the Minnesota Lynx, of course, who are motivated after what happened in the WNBA finals last year, though they made mostly under the radar moves. As far as on paper, and that's not how championships are won, but the most star-studded matchup the WNBA now has is the Indiana Fever and the New York Liberty. So when you look at those two teams specifically, I'm talking about the Liberty, and they didn't completely address what I think was still their biggest weakness last season. Because, look, I could have made the argument that they had no business losing last year, right? And they didn't lose, though they were precariously close to losing. And I was in the building, Barclays Center, Game 5, and I didn't feel the same championship vibes I thought I would feel. That's after I went to Minnesota for Game 4. Of course, Sabrina had the huge shot earlier in the series, and Sandy Brondello had complained about the officiating on the road. Of course, the officiating was the big story after Game 5. And in my life watching sports, I'm not sure I've felt as yucky about the way a game and a series has ended than I did the way the Lynx were screwed with the Liberty, which is why when like Cheryl Reeves said what she said, I raced to her press conference because I was like, I want to see what she's going to say. And of course, she let it all out. She didn't hold back in saying that they were robbed of the WNBA championship. But one of the things the Liberty struggled with then, and I still don't know if it's completely addressed, is they don't have that break you down scorer, right? Like Brianna Stewart is not in the absolute prime of her career anymore, and she's not a guard. Sabrina is an excellent all-around player, but she's not just like getting into the paint and crushing you that way. You know, Sabrina's more of a shooter than anything else, and a solid all-around player. It's not that she can't drive, but she's not. I don't know. I'm not afraid of her in that sense. And Cloud is another steady presence, but Fibich is a heck of a shooter, and just size. Lainey Hamilton, same thing, you know, versatility. So I think just the absolute length that the Liberty can throw at you and the level of talent that they have. And let's not forget Jonquel Jones, who's at her size is such a good shooter. But I do think they still, you know, if it comes down for bucket, I would favor the Fever there because they got Clark and Mitchell, right? Like Clark can make it happen any which way at any time for herself or others. And Mitchell is one of the best scorers in the entire league when it comes to just like isolation bucket getting. And then I think the Fever are now in a position to match up with anybody with the additions that they've made because DeWanna Bonner has the experience and length and defensive versatility, isn't going to be afraid to take a big shot. Sophie Cunningham has that toughness and feistiness, is also going to compete defensively, gives you another shooter out on the floor. Natasha Howard, going to be able to run the floor, finish, size, toughness. In addition to, you know, everything else that they added on the margins, that's where those little moves come into play. Okay, does Brianna Turner play spot minutes here or Sydney Colson spot minutes there, depending on who you're going against? But I don't see the Fever as inferior to the Liberty or anyone really. I think that the Fever still have the highest ceiling. If I'm being, obviously people are going to think I'm being biased, but that's just what I believe. You can't discount any of those other teams either that I mentioned. I mean, the Aces are returning Asia Wilson, duh, and Chelsea Gray looks like she's getting healthier. Jewel Lloyd is that swap for Kelsey Plum, but a lot of the core of that championship team, at least on the bench, is no longer there. And let's see how let's see what Kelsey Plum actually provided, right? I mean, I think she's going to elevate the Sparks, but we can't discount that possibly becoming a loss for the Aces, though you could argue, Lloyd maybe is going to have a chip on her shoulder and be ready to thrive in that role, of course. And then again, Nafisa Collier back, and she's been talking about how pissed she is in the offseason. So there's plenty of teams. There are always going to be a surprise team in the mix, but when it comes to the most star-studded squads that can be on the floor, I do think it's the Liberty and the Fever. And if I were handicapping, if it were me handicapping the season going in, I would have those teams at 1 and 2. I suppose it's only fair to give the Liberty the edge since they are the defending champs, but I don't think anybody's going to want to see the Fever. The moves that they made in the offseason, along with just the natural progression that you could expect with playing together, the core playing together, and Caitlin Clark taking another leap. To be honest, the unrivaled question marks like, is Lexi Hull going to be able to shoot at the same level she did in the second half of the season? And, how consistent is Aaliyah Boston going to be? Because the thing I trust the most about Aaliyah Boston is her intelligence on the basketball court. But she's going to have to finish her shots inside. And there's so many other good bigs in the league that's going to be a battle for her too. And you don't, when you get to these, matchups between these titans, the margin for error is going to be razor thin, as we saw with the Lynx and the Liberty series in the finals. That was as close as it could possibly be. But after the offseason movement, I do think those two teams stand above everybody else. But games aren't played on paper, right? Championships aren't won on paper. They are won on the floor. But until then, we can take our best guesses, take a gander, and the Fever and the Liberty are clearly both loaded after the WNBA offseason.